ridiculous that we're talking about this. Keir Starmer's ever gets the worst of every possible world. This is the problem of being governed by human rights lawyers that don't matter and don't understand. As Stephen, we said last time, international law is the bird that sits above the rhino of national interest. The bird may think it's driving the rhino, but the rhino knows better. States and their interests, blood and treasure, are the two things you have in foreign policy, not international lawyers.
Thank you so much for joining us, John. Why did America go to war with Iran?
You've got me, and this is one of the problems. I'm having PTSD over Iraq. There's this constant shifting of why the war was fought. And as George Catlett Marshall said, it was the Army Chief of Staff in World War II. You need to be able to, in one sentence, explain to a dead serviceman's family why he died. What was the strategy? What were the reasons for that? And the reasons were simple then: to stop Nazism from taking over the world and defeat Japanese imperialism. Very, very simple. We've had, by my count, 6 different explanations for why the war is being fought. And that would be fine, but you have to stick to one. You can't have a laundry list like Carolyn Levitt did. I need one reason, not 6. And if they're changing, I don't believe you know. And if you don't believe why you're fighting, if you can't explain to me the object of why you're fighting, you're unlikely to achieve it, and we're bound to stay there forever. This is what happened in Vietnam. This is what happened in Iraq. This is what happened in Afghanistan. First, we're told it was for the nuclear program, except the nuclear program, to use the president's phrase, was obliterated last June. Even if one doesn't buy that, minimally, the program was set back by common view 4 to 5 years, so it's not an immediate threat. So what in the world are we talking about? The second reason was ballistic missiles, that our troops in the region who are on bases can be shot with ballistic missiles. The Iranians have tens of thousands of them. Most of them aren't very good, but they have enough that they might be able to hit you. Except to do so makes no sense. Why in the world would the Iranians do that right now and have a death wish on themselves, and as a result, have to fight the United States when they are on their knees, having just shot thousands of their own children to stay in power? The third reason was this: a primary American interest, except it's not. The Trump administration, which doesn't get nearly enough credit for this, just pushed through the national security strategy where it said first is the Western Hemisphere, second comes the Indo-Pacific, third comes Europe, fourth comes the Middle East. So it's not a primary interest of any kind. Thank God for fracking and energy independence. The Middle East, though still important, is not a primary American interest. So we should be an offshore balancer, see to it that the balance of power in the Middle East isn't overthrown, which is the next argument, the fourth one. But that doesn't make any sense either, because in Iran, that's economically on its knees because the mullahs are illiterate and can't run a lemonade stand, because of sanctions against them, because of their nuclear program being destroyed, because of their people rising up, and because the Shia Crescent, decimated. Hamas doesn't even control Gaza anymore. Hezbollah's on its last legs in Lebanon. The Assad regime doesn't exist anymore. There's chaos in Iraq, and the pirates of the Caribbean, the Houthis, aren't serious enough to pass the laugh test. So the Shia Crescent is destroyed. So this isn't a country about to run the table anytime soon. Regime change was the fifth reason put forward, except how can you do this? Iran is too weak to be threatening, but too strong to be gotten rid of immediately. The house of cards that people promised, neoconservatives and others, has yet to come to pass, because we just saw in the demonstrations, until mid-level officers, captains and colonels and lieutenant colonels and majors go over to the opposition and give them wherewithal and weaponry, you don't have a revolutionary situation. And that never occurred, despite the Crown Prince desperately saying it would. Instead, they shot their own people down. There was no revolutionary situation, and there remains to be none. And the last reason, pathetic, well, the Israelis were going to do it, so we went along because we'd get bombed anyway. Secretary Rubio's exhausted reason the other day, that doesn't pass the laugh test. These are our allies, and if you can't keep your allies in line, there's a problem. So these are the 6 reasons put forward, which is 5 too many, and absolutely none of them make sense.
So you're not convinced by the official reasons for the war. What do you think is really going on then?
I think they were sold a bill of goods by the Israelis and pushed by internal people. One of the good things about the president is there is a lot more debate internally than there is in many other presidencies. I remember the bad old days of George W. Bush, and the very problem was there was no internal debate. Everybody just fell in line. I was in the room for some of those meetings as a young guy, nervously wondering before it came to me if anybody was going to say anything about Iraq, and nobody did. The president has a lot of different people internally, and the neoconservatives still make up about a third of the cohort of the party and people in the room. And they told him the most dangerous thing you can hear in foreign policy: this can be easy. This will be simple. The Israelis then said, look, they're all meeting at once. The Ayatollah and the senior religious clerics are meeting on Saturday, as are the people actually running the country in the Revolutionary Guard. They're meeting near each other, and if we have a daylight raid, which no one will expect, we can get them all at once. If we decapitate the regime, there will then be regime changes. The people will rise up, and you will have a, if not a democracy, at least a more pro-Western and pro-American Iran. You'll have destroyed the nuclear program. You'll have a more pro-Western Iran. It will cost us nothing, and it will be easily done. And our military is the best in the world. They did exactly what the intel said. The president rightly said about 48 senior people are knocked out. But has anything else happened? Has the great and glorious days come to pass? No. He was told it would be easy. He was told there'd be regime change without any boots being on the ground, without anything being in line. And guess what? There wasn't. And that's the reason, I think, for the changing of policy, for the constant moving on, as they try to figure out what to do and lessen what they say. But the problem is, half in, it's easier to get in than it is to get out. As Bismarck said, the problem with war is the enemy has a vote too. And if the Iranians just simply won't negotiate with you and won't go away, you have to keep bombing them. Well, how long are we going to do that? To achieve what aim? If you don't know what that is, what in the world are we doing?
Does this remind you, not morally but strategically, of Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, when he assumed, I think, according to Western intelligence, that he could topple the Ukrainian regime within days, basically set up a puppet government? He wasn't expecting to be bogged down in a war for years.
No, that's right. I mean, we know, as you say, from the intel, it's open source, that he made some of the troops pack their dress uniforms to go in about 3 weeks, was the estimate, that they'd have cleared it out and be in Kiev, and then they'd have Putin likes parades. We'd have a lovely parade in Kiev showing their dominance, and they'd be out of there. The problem is when anyone thinks these things are easy, they almost never are. I mean, in America, there are books written saying everyone will be home by Christmas. And every time I read that in a historical book, I know it won't happen and that all hell is about to break loose, because it never goes that way. It's never that simple. It's never that easy. Home by Christmas is an illusion. Then something terrible happens. So yes, I think there was a miscalculation strategically, and then you have to decide what to do. And what I hope the president does is declare victory and leave. That would be the realist, sensible thing to do. Look, you've defanged the regime. You've obliterated the Navy. You've knocked out a bunch of the missiles. You've decapitated the senior members of the regime. You already set the nuclear program back 4 or 5 years. Fair enough. Let's get out and see what develops from there. That would take a great deal of moral courage to do that. But I think that that would be better than us talking about this for the next 10 years. And what I fear, Stephen, is soon we're going to talk about special ops forces on the ground. Then we'll talk about people having to protect them. So we'll have to have boots on the ground. Just as in Vietnam, we would bomb them, but we need troops to guard the landing strips. Suddenly we have 500,000 people there without anybody knowing the reasons for it in the first place. This is the moment of maximum strategic danger.
Let's talk about one of the reasons that you gave for this campaign against Iran, which was that Iran potentially has nuclear weapons or is approaching having nuclear weapons and these intercontinental ballistic missiles. To what extent is Iran, or was Iran, an existential threat to the United States?
The two things that you learn in my world, Stephen, are simple. The two things that matter are a mixture of threat and capacity. If I'm an individual homeless guy at the corner and I say I want to nuke the world, I'm no threat because I don't have the ability to do that. Now, he may very well want to do that, but if he doesn't have wherewithal to do it, I give him a quarter and move along quickly. Okay? Iran was kind of in this position. I don't doubt that the Israelis are right. I've been studying the Islamic Republic since, I don't know, the 80s, most of my adult life. I don't doubt that they're a revolutionary power that wants to upend the regional balance of power. It doesn't go beyond that. They're not a global power. Let's not overdo this. This is the fourth most important region in the world of the United States. And within that, this is a country that's not the most important country right now in the region. Easily the most two important countries are Israel and Turkey. They're the two that have been winning. Turkey just won the Syrian civil war. Their puppet al-Shura is now the president. They're doing great. Neo-Ottomanism is back. Erdogan, that fox, has come back and through it all is in a really good position. Israel, having just decimated all the groups I've said, it is a really good position. You add in the Saudis and the Gulf states, that's another pole of power. The Egyptians, moribund as they are economically, given their demography, they still matter. So Iran's the fourth or the fifth most important. So do they want to upend the order? Well, yes. Under, General Soleimani, they tried and they failed. And we should get credit for that. That's wonderful. We got rid of the organizing genius of the Shia Crescent, Soleimani. It's great. We've knocked back the nuclear program for 5 years. That's great. Economically, they're a basket case. That's great. But they're a little bit like the homeless guy at the corner. They may want to do that. I should keep an eye on them like the homeless guy. But I'm not worried that he's capable of nuking that city. And I'm not worried that Iran is capable of doing that. We've got to keep our eye on the ball. China is the peer superpower competitor the United States should be worried with. Trump brilliantly is transitioning us to this new era of multipolarity where the U.S. is first among equals, chairman of the board of that new era, absolutely, but there are other board members. We're like Britain in the 1800s. We're Victorian or Edwardian England, and that's what we ought to be, and balance and stop World War I's from occurring. This, however, is a sideshow. We're wasting money, time, and resources on the old guy at the corner who can't do much of anything. Do the Iranians want to do it? Stephen, they do. Can they do it? No more than the old guy at the corner, but partly because of the stuff America's done in the past.
The big question is, how would one know how far Iran was towards getting a nuclear weapon? And if you listen to Steve Witkoff, the negotiator who was trying to negotiate a new Iran deal, this is from President Trump's administration, he says that the Iranian negotiators told him essentially, we won't even take enriched uranium from you for free because basically we want this enriched uranium for us, which could potentially be used for nuclear weapons. So basically, Steve Witkoff was saying the Iranians weren't serious in these negotiations because they were claiming, obviously, they need this uranium for medical research and for other reasons and for sort of civic reasons. So if the Iranians weren't serious in these negotiations, this is the argument from the Trump administration, then we had to go in and we had to prevent them again from getting these nuclear weapons.
Stephen, you don't have to do anything. Let's start with that. You have to judge what's going on. I hate when I'm told I had to do that. This is high school dating. I didn't have to break up with you. Okay, that's not you chose to break up with me, and that might be fine. But it's not have to. They weren't 6 minutes from getting a nuclear weapon. I remember in Iraq, I'm having PTSD about the bogus Iraqi arguments. They were about to get nuclear weapons, except they weren't. There was yellow cake from Niger at the time was the example, except there wasn't. They were negotiating with Al-Qaeda, except they weren't. The amount of fatuous nonsense I heard that has now been disproven as bogus reasons, and Witkoff, there's much debate about what the Iranians were doing. Where he's right is that for 20 years, the Iranians have strung out negotiations as long as humanly possible to keep the option of having a nuclear weapon ultimately. There's no doubt that's true. They have. Are they anywhere near one? No. As I've just said, they're absolutely not because we obliterated Fordow. Did we destroy it for all time? No. If you have nuclear scientists and if you have wherewithal and you have uranium, you can enrich the uranium. You can miniaturize missiles to put uranium on missiles to send off. Sure, you can do that. That takes 3 to 5 years. Everyone admits that now they weren't enriching anything and that they had nothing at 90%, which is what they need. It was at 60. This is just not the case. Were they stringing them along? Perhaps, but they were also saying things like, you can check, the IAEA can have aggressive inspections, which was a concession from the Iranians that they've never done, whenever they want. And if it's and we will see to it that we lower it. We don't keep it at 60. We put it back to the 3%, which is where we would like it to be. They agreed to do that. That's not a time I'd stop negotiating if they're making concessions. Do they ultimately want to keep it? Certainly elements of the Iranian leadership want to have that option, but other elements seem not to. And so why don't we explore that, particularly because they're 5 years away. If they weren't 5 years away, I would care. Do I think that ultimately large portions of the Iranian government are a revolutionary power that want to upend the Middle East? Yes, but they're a power that's weaker than Egypt, that's weaker than Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Turkey, and Israel. So what are we talking about here? Let's grow up and look at interests. Nobody made us do anything. We chose to fight a war of choice. That's what's haunting me. Let's be honest and admit that.
They're also saying this is a defensive war because Iran was about to strike US and Israeli targets in the Middle East. Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, said Trump had a feeling based on facts that Iran was about to strike America. So again, if Iran was about to do that, isn't this justified?
Stephen, a feeling based on facts. We're back to high school dating. A feeling based on facts. I don't even know what that means. I think, again, high school, I'm having PTSD about senior prom. This is ridiculous. All right. Were the Iranians, let's go back a step. A feeling based on facts is my favorite comment of the week. I may use this from now on. Meaning, I want to have dinner. I have a feeling based on facts. I want pizza. All right. This is where we're at. And we have to, again, be serious. I'm glad you're smiling. We have to be serious people here, but try to not be enraged and find things funny. The reality is that this is deadly serious stuff, and let's treat it as such. The reality is that the Iranians, or at least elements of them, are a revolutionary party. They have been since 1979. They want to upend the American-dominated order in the Middle East. I'm speaking, they do, that's right. But they do not have the capacity to do that for all the 16 reasons I laid out. Economically, they don't. In terms of the nuclear program, they don't. Geostrategically, they don't, because Soleimani was whacked, the organizing genius, the Jack Welch of this thing. You could replace the man, but not the ties. It's kinship ties in the Middle East that matter. I wrote a book about Lawrence of Arabia, and as Lawrence famously said, it's people, not institutions, that matter. It's who you know, who you have tea with, who you talk to. Soleimani had those people in line from 30 years of networking. Yes, they replaced the men, but they couldn't replace the contacts, the Rolodex, the phone, all the things he brought with him. And those ties suffered, and then we set them back along with the Israelis in the 12-day war. So they're in no position economically, strategically, in nuclear terms, geostrategically, to do what they want to do. Okay, then we have to add up all the other things that we do. Remember, that's called the America First movement. America First. Remember that? This is the last year domestically the president's going to be able to get anything done. And everybody knows this because the House is likely to fall to the Democrats in the midterms. That's totally normal. That's what happens in midterm elections. There are only 4 times since the Civil War that the party out of power doesn't pick up seats. We have a majority Republicans of 3 in the House. It's gone. Everyone knows that. When you go to D.C., everyone on both sides knows this. So the president has 1 year to go to get that America First agenda enacted. Things like the SAVE Act, where we have elections that are actually safeguarded and illegals can't vote willy-nilly, which is a great idea. But it takes effort and time. You have 1 year to go, and then you can't do anything. And then the presidency will shift to foreign policy, which is true of every president of the 20th century and the 21st. That's what you do. This is the normal pattern. Donald Trump is an extraordinary comeback, but he doesn't upend the laws of how American politics works. And so he has 1 year to go, and he knows this. Why are we spending this year talking about the homeless guy at the corner who can't do anything right now, rather than worrying about our debt, our roads, our schools? And don't buy the argument, Stephen, that Americans can do more than one thing at a time. I mean, I wish my grandma were right and I could walk and chew gum at the same time. But let me tell you, from having worked in Washington for a decade, you cannot. They tend to focus on one major thing. That's how DC works. And so now we're going to be focusing on Iran for at least 6 months, if we're lucky, and maybe longer if we're not lucky. There goes the year. There goes America First. The whole point is not to fight wars or worry about Zelensky or worry about, which is a 5th order priority, or Iran, which is a 3rd order priority. What in the world are we doing here? And if this goes on, is the Jacksonian base going to put up with this forever? I would imagine not.
I do want to get on to the domestic stuff later, but let's stick with the Middle East for now. A lot of people would describe this war as Israel's war. You mentioned earlier Marco Rubio saying in a press conference that, we basically had to do this because Israel was about to go and strike Iran, and we were concerned about the repercussions for US bases across the Middle East. And then the administration has then sort of tried to row back on that comment, even Trump saying, I forced Israel's hand into doing this. Is this Israel's war ultimately?
I think that Israel has played a major role in this, and I think we have to talk about this like grown-ups. And let me tell you, Stephen, I won't name the senator. I'll protect the guilty. But one of the senators that I work with, and I mean, he's an amazing realist, a star of the Senate. I have nothing but regard for him. But we had this meeting, and we had dinner. It was very nice. Everyone older than the senator and me was reflexively Mike Huckabee pro-Israel, like they could do no wrong. And I found that very odd. I don't think that of any ally. I love the UK, Stephen. I grew up there. I adore it. St. Andrews, it's the only other country I'd go and fight for. It taught me how to be a thinking human being, St. Andrews. I adore it. Many clients come from London. I love going there. I probably know London better than New York, given my background. I'm all in since my St. Andrews days. But it's just another difficult ally. I'm an American. That comes first. Germany, Japan, Britain are difficult allies. Now, as Eisenhower said, I'd rather have allies than not have them. I mean, it's a good thing to have. Israel is a difficult first order ally we have a special relationship with. But the guys older than me all worshipped Israel in an odd Huckabee-like bizarro way. But the guys younger than me and the senator all were like, Israel's terrible. And I found both his reactions very odd. Israel is neither wonderful nor terrible. It is a country with interests, and its job is to push its interests as best it can. If we're dumb enough to go along with them, you know I'm no fan of Zelensky, but I don't fault Zelensky, Stephen, for trying to get every dollar he can out of the United States. That's his job. It's my job not to be a moron. It's my job not to say, gee, here's the checkbook. Oh, and we won't audit what you're doing with the money in Ukraine, the dumbest thing the Democrats ever did. We're not auditing the money we give them in Ukraine. I fault us for going along with it. So let's treat Israel in a grown-up manner. It is one of the countries that knows America best. It has a tremendous lobbying interest in America. It is a close ally. It gives us great intelligence. We do an awful lot of sharing with them, but we should do nothing. No one should be at the table having this discussion if you're not primarily worried about American interests. No single human being in America politically having that discussion in either party should put anything but the country first. I can't believe I have to say that. That seems to me to be self-evident, but it's not, because we're worrying now about how much influence Israel has. It has an awful lot of influence. Did it have a lot of influence now? Yeah. I don't mind them for asking. I don't mind. Iran, they've been trying to push us to bomb Iran for the better part of my adult life, Stephen. And you can say no. You can say, if you go ahead, we'll cut your funding at the knees. You're dependent on us in all kinds of ways, for intel, for funding, for diplomatic support. Are you really going to endanger that by bombing Iran? It's your sovereign decision. Go ahead, but we're not coming with you. You could say that. The idea that we have to do anything, that the Israeli tail can wag the American dog, is absolutely ridiculous and ought to be to any Democrat, any Republican, any American. And I would say the same about Germany, Britain, Japan, any other country. I am a realist American Republican. I am a one-nation Tory guy. I don't want anybody else doing this. And if you can't agree to that, then America's the problem, not Israel, for asking. Did it have a huge say? Far too much of one, yes.
What about the biblical justification for this war? We saw reports that generals were talking about Jesus and Trump being basically this war being God's plan and so on. And then you have Christian Zionists, obviously, who view Israel as very important because of certain passages in the Bible, and they tie this in with US foreign policy. So is there any biblical justification to this?
No. And I grew up in Ohio. We weren't quite the Amish, but I'm used to a good 3-hour sermon, Stephen. I was the worst thing in the world, a rebellious older boy. I understand my scripture. I take it seriously. Your moral obligation serving the United States as an ambassador like Huckabee, a general, a decision maker like me and my friends, whoever you are, is to the people of your country, to nothing else but the people there. The president swears an oath on the Bible to support the Constitution of the United States and its people, not to support any other group, not to support neoconservative views of democracy, not to support Wilsonian views about this fictional, as you and I were laughing about, rule of law last time, the rules-based order. He doesn't swear an oath to his friends from the NGO community to go to the Four Seasons Hotel. He doesn't swear an oath for the UN. He swears an oath to the American people and to the Constitution. That's it. Anything and anyone who says that, beyond them on the right, the center, or the left, I am your enemy. Because the American people are what we ought to care about, particularly in moments of crisis like now. So anyone saying that, I think, needs to get their head examined, or at least have a nap.
Now, you also talked about this being comparable to the Iraq War. And I wasn't really around then. I mean, I certainly wasn't old enough to know anything about it. But from my understanding, there was a lot of pushback against people who were critical of the war, who invoked patriotism. This was in the aftermath of 9/11, and said, shouldn't you be patriotic, support our troops, support the mission, and so on. Again, that argument could be made today. I'm sure some people are making it, that, America is winning. We're destroying the Iranian Navy. We're destroying the missiles. Shouldn't you be supporting our troops on the ground?
I am supporting our troops on the ground. Again, my father was in the regular army. And I've spent 20 years in exile, Stephen, when it would have been easier to go along and be undersecretary of something. That would have been a very nice life. It was all planned out. All I had to do was cause no trouble and be the third most interesting person on a panel. Not difficult in Washington. The bar's pretty low there, as you know. And I could probably have managed that in my sleep. And instead, I chose to be in exile and do what I had to. And my father was an older man during the time of Iraq, said, well, you have to shave in the morning, John. You have to keep faith with all the people. One of the things I don't like about the neocons is that they treat people like pieces on a risk board, that if somebody gets hot and throws six all the time, you start flicking the pieces off the board. My children beat me constantly. I blame it on the risk, on their throwing, maybe their strategy, but off go the pieces. And they're not human beings. Every single soldier is someone with a wife and a sweetheart and a mother and a father and dreams. And we've got to keep faith with them above everything else. That's patriotism. I sacrificed a very easy life and maybe fame and fortune doing so, though my life isn't too bad, Stephen. I like running my own political risk firm. I'm living in Milan. It's not awful. But I made major sacrifices because I believed in being patriotic, in keeping faith with these soldiers. The founders of our country, of all people, would want us to be critical at a time of war. My God, that's what the whole country was founded on in the first place. Where you're right, and it is PTSD time for me about Iraq, is just today, there are two articles in the Wall Street Journal, which of course is the House newspaper of neoconservatism, was and is. One article was by a guy who said, well, why don't you wait to be critical till after it's all over? I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why don't I shut up and not exercise my rights in a republic until it's too late for what I say to matter? That's insane. And don't you want me to be quiet, neocon? I bet you do. Second is the Wall Street Journal just saying that the only people against this are influencers like me, are people, some of the leadership on the right are more nervous and things are going great. No one is doubting, again, Stephen, as was true in Iraq, that we were going to wipe the board with the Republican Guard. Nobody doubted that they did it in a day and a half was extraordinary. That our military can pinpoint targets like they're doing using AI in real time now is extraordinary, what they can do. No one's doubting the ability of the military. And yet we didn't lose the war in Iraq. We didn't lose a battle in Vietnam. We still lost both the wars. This is what happens if you're not serious. They're already questioning our patriotism, Stephen, and we haven't been at war a week. It is your abject duty to get out there, whatever you think of any view, and say it now. It's easy to go along when times are going your way. Patriotism requires sacrifice, and that I learned, I wouldn't say the hard way. I don't regret getting the first line of my obituary right. I don't. That I stood up to the neocons. I don't. For all my frailties, for all my foibles, I got the first line of the obituary right. And I hate to be the canary in the coal mine again. But if you look at wars of choice in Haiti, in Somalia, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, every single time, the Balkans being the least disastrous of the bunch, but not good. Every single time on that disastrous list, the neocons told us how easy that would be, and guys like me said how hard that would be. Perhaps the people in a republic who get it wrong shouldn't be listened to anymore. Perhaps the problem is listening to people who've been wrong 8 times in a row and not listening to realists like myself who've been right. Until republics listen to people who are right, you will keep making the same mistakes. And I hear the same people. Their names are the same. John Bolton, Ann Applebaum, Max Boot. I can run the list. David Frum. They're the same people who told me how easy the Iraq war would be. Why would anyone listen to them? We wouldn't let them make coffee at my firm.
To be fair, when people on your side said that Venezuela would be a disaster, that could lead to complete chaos in the region. Sometimes they even said that the operation last year to bomb Iran's nuclear sites could lead to World War III, nuclear war, and so on, and it didn't. So sometimes these warnings don't always pan out, and Trump has had some successes in foreign policy when he's been interventionist.
Can I jump in? I was for both those interventions, and let me explain why in realist terms. They're incredibly well-defined missions, and there are no boots on the ground, and there's no nation building. I know when I've captured Maduro and his wife and gotten out with nobody dying, that's a successful mission. By definition, that's done and dusted. Wonderful. I know if Fordow's hit and it's set back by common feeling 5 years, 3 to 7, take your pick. But I know that we struck the thing. Nobody died. No planes were stopped. We all returned to base, and the base, you can see, and I've looked at the pictures, it was indeed decimated. So in both cases, I said, this is a very well-defined mission. I'm a realist. I'm not against using force. I'm for using force when it's clearly defined for specific interests that we can argue if they're worth doing. In both cases, I argue that it absolutely was worth doing. I think if something happens to change the government in Cuba, it's worth doing. I'm not against using force. I'm against using force when it's ill-defined, when it doesn't serve primary American interests, and when I don't know if I'm winning or I'm losing. So I agree. Those to me aren't realists who are saying that. Those are true isolationists. Those are people who always say no. And I am just as critical. The neocons, to every neocon, which is a hammer, every problem is a nail. You always invade. That's crazy. Isolationists say you never invade. I find that crazy. I read a book called The Godfather Doctrine. Sonny, the oldest brother, is for always shooting. So, of course, he gets killed on the causeway. Tom Hagen is a Democrat. He negotiates with everyone, so he gets kidnapped because he doesn't understand how force works. Only Michael, as a realist, says, it depends. The only thing I care about is the family, promoting the interests of the family. Sometimes you negotiate, sometimes you shoot. You do both to preserve the family. And that Michael Corleone doctrine is kind of the key to the Godfather doctrine. And that's what I believe in and why I'm not bothered by anybody who has a more nuanced view. If you're always for doing anything, invading or not invading, you're a child. You're not living, it's a fairy tale.
So Pete Hegseth has been very insistent that this isn't equivalent to Iraq. He says this isn't about nation building, this isn't about spreading democracy. This is a very limited operation which will take weeks, not months, not years, and there won't be boots on the ground, most likely, although obviously the administration has had different noises about that. So how do you respond to that? This isn't Iraq. This is again, we've got very limited goals to destroy the Iranian missiles and the Navy and so on, and it's only going to take a matter of weeks.
Well, the first thing is it's already gone from a couple days to a couple weeks to 4 weeks to 8 weeks. There's creep in the numbers. They're giving themselves more and more time. So that reminds me of Iraq, and that makes me very suspicious as that goes. That the PTSD is kicking in again. The second thing is that they don't agree on what this mission is. Hegseth has one version. Rubio has another version. You hear another version from Carolyn Levitt. It's constantly changing. And so how do I know if we accomplish this mission if you keep changing what the success is? They didn't in Fordow, which is why I was for it. You take out that part of the program. You use the bunker busters. You go in and you take it out. Like the Bond villain, it was buried a mile underground. You take it out. You are successful. You take out Madero. You work with Delcy Rodriguez. Incredibly clear and worked beautifully. That they're constantly changing the rationale bothers me, that they're constantly expanding the timeline bothers me, and that they're now talking about, and Hegseth in his comments was saying, well, maybe we'll have special ops, maybe not. Well, the next step after that is we need some more troops to guard them. I mean, where does this end? I can't tell you where it ends if I don't know what the mission is, and if everyone isn't singing from the hymnal, and they're not.
What about the response from the Iranians to this war? So they've obviously gone after the Gulf states and Israel, and they've been attacking hotels in Dubai and things like that. Are you surprised by this response? What do you think the outcome of this response will be, particularly attacking Gulf states like Oman, which have traditionally been closer to Iran?
Yes, it is surprising, and I think it's actually strategically not a bad move. I mean, what they're doing is putting a cost on housing American bases in the region because they're aware these bases are what are pummeling them. And they want there to be a cost from the Gulf states have had it both ways. They've had from an Iranian perspective. They've had American protection, and yet they've been able to throttle the Iranians. And at the same time, Dubai, which I love, we have clients there. I love going. Disneyland for grown-ups. You go to Dubai, and it seems to be this peaceful oasis. They've been pushing this agenda for 25 years. In the midst of this chaotic region, Dubai was really the fishing village of multipolarity. Money came from India. Money came from China. Money came from the Gulf states in the Middle East. It came from Russia. It came from Europe. It came from the United States. It was this new multipolar world, but it was peaceful. So they had American protection while being peaceful. And the Iranians are saying, no, you can't have it both ways. You can't throttle us and strangle us and keep this lovely image of yourself as the fishing village of multipolarity anymore. And we're going to extract a cost. And even after this is all done, I don't care the damage they do. I've seen the 6-star at the Palm Court where I had sushi with my stepkids knocked out. And the kids are like, isn't that where we had sushi? And you're kind of nervously looking at each other going, gosh, yeah, it is. This is to stop in the long run this easy financial goal. Make them think twice about supporting America and basing in the long run. They're playing for the next game. They're playing for down the road. The other interesting thing about Iran is that that doesn't show panic to me, which surprises me. I thought they'd be more panicked than they are. Lara Jani, one of the survivors who runs the National Security Council and is an old fox who's been around forever, he's like, no, we're not going to negotiate. We don't want to negotiate. The Iranians are gaming out. If the Americans don't put boots on the ground and they don't do regime change face to face, they can bomb our rubble till there are no two stones on top of each other. But if they're not going to come in, they're going to run out of wherewithal. They're going to run out of targets. What are they going to do? I mean, you can't have demonstrations in the street if the people can't get out because they're being bombed. So at some point, the Americans have to stop. When they stop, we still live here. There was a joke in Afghanistan. The Taliban may not have watches, but they can tell the time. And what this meant is they're still going to live there. The Pashtun are still going to live there after we go home. And if we don't set up something there, they'll wait us out. They'll be bombed. More guys will be killed. But if that state doesn't unravel, they just simply sit and wait. And what happens? We either have to go into the full trap of putting guys on the ground, and then it's everything I'm fearing, or we stop and they're still in some sort of position to survive. And that's what they're playing for. They don't have to win any battles. They have to exist. The Pashtun never beat our army at anything, nor could they. Our army's way too good to be beaten by them. What they can do is wait us out. It took 20 years and $2 trillion. Makes me sick to say that. But the Taliban came back. Why? They didn't have watches, but they could tell the time.
What about the European response to this? And you can break that down into different allies. Britain in particular and Spain have been criticized by Donald Trump. Keir Starmer has said this is basically against international law. I presume you have a comment on that. And, Britain wasn't allowing America to use our bases offensively, only for defensive operations. Obviously, other countries have responded differently. Canada's been more supportive, Australia, and so on. So can you break down some of the reaction of America's allies?
Yeah, I mean, it shows it doesn't matter as much anymore. And I say that with great sorrow, but who cares? I've talked to a number of generals who've said to me, it's so much easier not working with allies. We don't have to go through the rigmarole. We can do as we wish. We have to go to Washington. We have a meeting. We're done. We don't have to say, what do the Danes think about this? The Danish army, to give you an idea, is smaller than the National Guard of the state of Alabama. Okay? My football team could take the Danish army in high school. I mean, this is ridiculous that we're talking about this. Keir Starmer ever gets the worst of every possible world. This is the problem of being governed by human rights lawyers that don't matter and don't understand. And Stephen, we said last time, international law is the bird that sits above the rhino of national interest. The bird may think it's driving the rhino, but the rhino knows better. States and their interests, blood and treasure are the two things you have in foreign policy, not international lawyers. You come and get me. You can't. So what are we talking about? This is utter nonsense. So you can't have the basis for offensive use, but we'll let you defend it defensively. Who's making these decisions? Some judge sitting in London? Americans are throwing their hands up and saying, this isn't serious. This is unseriousness. This is a few good men. Colonel Jessup, you sit in the garden and hate me sitting on the wall, but you need me on that wall, because in the real world, this is just laughable. And so Starmer agrees to finally give the basis after they're no longer of any use to anybody, thereby aggravating the Americans in the Trump administration. But by letting them have use, he aggravates the left wing of his own party. Congratulations, you've somehow managed to annoy everyone all the time, all at once, which really is the trifecta of incompetence. And that's what you see with Starmer. For Sanchez, it's easy. I mean, Sanchez, being anti-American is an easy play. He's a left-wing socialist in Spain. Let me put it this way, Stephen. If they get to Spain when we're fighting our way through from I don't even know who, but if they made it to Spain, we'd probably have other concerns than Spain at that point. So this is a free ride. I mean, I love that Sanchez, when we actually demanded 3.5%, at least had the nerve to say, no, I'm not going to spend that. Well, why would I do that? I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to do it. So it's an easy win for him being against that. Unlike Starmer, that at least makes sense to me. Kearney, again, bird and rhino, he can make lovely speeches in Davos all he wants, but the reality is he has to renegotiate the USMCA, the trade deal with the United States. 90% of Canadian wherewithal is within 100 miles of their border. Up the Inuit don't add a whole lot of product. And so what you're talking about here is everyone's connected to America one way or the other, and he knows it. and he stuck his neck out as far as he can go. Now he's going to go along because he has no other option but to go along. This just shows you the state of disrepair that the alliance is in. But it is extraordinary to me that Starmer's mentioning doing more with Europe when Europe yet again has proven that pocket Napoleon. Macron is strutting around doing nothing. I mean, it's embarrassing, frankly, at this point. He's taken the Fifth Republic, which worked perfectly fine, and made it the incompetent Fourth Republic because of his arrogance. He's ruined that system, and he's strutting around looking for a victory before he's forgotten in 3 minutes being out of office. Merits, in Germany, we have a country that outsourced its strategy to the United States, outsourced its trade to China, and outsourced its energy policy to Russia. Well done. Talk about a trifecta of incompetence. Well done, Angela Merkel, the most overrated statesman ever. We give an award out, Stephen, at my firm called the Merkel for the most overrated statesman every year. Listen on our Substack, gang. You'll see it there. The Merkel every year. Macron won this year, unanimous vote. Macron won. So you look around, you want to join a group that's grown at, and here are the numbers for the year, drum roll please, 0.9% in France, 0.7% in Italy, and 0.2% in Germany. Why in the world, after 64 quarters of this nonsense, would anyone want to join economic illiterates like this? I think this is lemmings rushing off a cliff, and I have no idea what's going on in Britain, and the sooner the human rights lawyers aren't running anything, frankly, the better.
It's funny you say about the allies and how the American generals feel it's much easier now. After France fell in the Second World War in 1940, there was a huge relief amongst many people in the cabinet in Britain, and particularly amongst the king, who basically said France was completely useless and we're glad to be alone, which was quite very English reaction. But this is interesting, isn't it, that America has been able to act unilaterally with a huge, obviously with Israel, but with a huge military behind it. Are we we've been talking a lot about the collapse of the American empire over the last 10 years. There's been a lot of talk about the rise of China and how America has become weak on the world stage. Does this prove actually that America still retains its global dominance?
Well, it does. I mean, it's a different world. But one of the things, and I've heard this from Europeans who work for me here in Italy, it's very interesting. And they say to me, you're right to be critical of what they're doing, but you have to understand how jealous we are of you. And these are people I respect and work with and are really smart about this and younger. And we have a glass of wine once a week and talk politics together. It's one of my favorite things here in Milan. And they said, look, your country has agency. You're the only country that has agency. The international lawyers condemn things from the side. Europe grows at nothing. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have a common foreign policy. It doesn't have a common defense policy. If you ask a Southerner in Europe what's defense policy, they would say rightly North Africa. If you ask an East European, it would deal with Russia. There is no common policy there. They're growing at nothing, and they have no army. And yet Kaja Kallas goes around making these pronouncements as though she mattered. We wouldn't, again, let her make coffee at the firm either. And the reality is America has proven it still has agency, that the United States is chairman of the board. There are other board members, certainly China. India is rising as a great power. Japan is still a great power. They're regional powers that matter. The Gulf states, Saudi, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, these countries matter. But we are undoubtedly chairman of the board. And I always worried about talking about multipolarity in this way, Stephen. When I say multipolarity, I mean America's chairman of the board and will be for the rest of my lifetime, without a doubt. Biggest economy, most resilient economy, most liquid capital markets, best military in the world, a united democratic system with which to work these things through, a common foreign policy. Since the Battle of Gettysburg, that's all set. But when I say multipolarity, I mean these other people now matter. When the French say multipolarity, they mean everyone's relatively equal. That's not the same thing at all, and we have to call that out. And I think that Venezuela, I think Fordow, and even I think this mistake, in my view, call out that the United States has agency in a way no other country in the world, for good and ill, that no other country in the world does. And this is the key secret sauce to our success. And better, the Chinese look ridiculous. I mean, they were meeting with Maduro an hour and a half before we got him. Nothing happened. This access, this Neil Ferguson, neocon, wrong about everything. There's a guy I love competing with. This guy says, well, yeah, the axis of autocracy is like they meet in some clubhouse like Spectre in a Bond film. And how's extortion going? How's blackmail going, number 4? Look what happened in reality. Nothing. Nothing happened. We took out Venezuela. Nothing happened. In fact, they met with him the night before. We let them leave, then we took him out. Cuba, nothing's going to happen. We all know whatever happens in Cuba, they're not going to come to their rescue. And even Iran, a much more significant ally that was mentioned by Ferguson and his neocon buddies, nothing's happening. They're decrying international law. They're going to the UN and making speeches. When it comes down to it, in terms of action, in terms of agency, there is no axis of autocracies. There are a series of great powers, none of them as great as the United States. Are we alone in the world? No, that's why I'm not a neoconservative. We have to deal with other people in the world. But are we equal in the world? No. The Wilsonian fantasy isn't true either. So both the far left and the far right have been really proven wrong by what's going on here.
I said we'd get on to domestic policy now and the impacts this will have on Donald Trump, on the midterms and everything else. So Trump obviously was elected on this no more wars, no more forever wars platform, America first and so on. Someone like J.D. Vance has been incredibly strong on this stuff and consistent for years, and yet he seems to be supporting this war with Iran. Is there any upside to this domestically if they manage to achieve these myriad of goals that they've set in a short period of time? Will this actually help Donald Trump and the Republicans in the midterms?
No. And short answer is no. And the reason is foreign policy doesn't matter that much to Americans. If you look at polling, it's somewhere between 2 and 4% vote on a foreign policy issue, unless it's a World War type situation. Then those numbers go up quite dramatically. But even at the height of Vietnam, when it was bleeding out and horrible in 1967 to say 71, 20-some% or so were voting, not even a majority then were voting. So this is a second order issue. And this is what was so genius about America First, is that Donald Trump, it took great bravery, got up and said, when the Republican Party was run by neocons in 2016, they had 17 of them on the stage, if you remember, and they went around, who thinks Iraq was a great idea? Every single one of the monkeys said, yeah, it was great, because that's the party line. Only Donald Trump had the moral fortitude to say, no, I think it was a disaster. And that helped get him elected. That supercharged the campaign. He was a different kind of conservative, willing to admit that neoconservatism had led people into a ditch. And as you say, Vance has made his career out of really pushing a very strong, bless his heart, a non-interventionist line. The problem right now, and I don't hold this against the vice president, it's the worst job in the world. Nobody ever has wanted to be vice president because it's a family show, Stephen. I'll give you the family version of John Nance Garner. When they asked him, he was FDR's vice president twice, and they said, what do you think of the vice presidency? And he said, it's not worth a bucket of warm spit. The only person who's ever liked the job was Thomas Jefferson because it gave him more time for his experiments. I mean, nobody likes being vice president. You have to support the president. You tend to win the nomination, and then they have a hard time in the general election. That's kind of the pattern, the Kamala Harris, Al Gore pattern. But you're tethered to the president, and everyone knows that. You're expected to be ultra loyal, whatever happens. Poor Hubert Humphrey had to go along with Vietnam when he could easily have won the presidency in '68, but Johnson took him down, and he was loyal to him to the end. We kind of expect that. No one's going to count that against J.D. Vance. But even if they do everything right, it's not going to move those numbers because only 4% are going to vote on it. And you're going to lose that many by the America First thing, that you haven't kept faith with the Jacksonian base and put your focus on domestic matters in this critical last year. Nobody expects him to after the midterms. The midterms are going to go by about 15. I mean, again, only 3 times since 1865, since the end of the Civil War, has the party in power gained seats. They're not going to gain seats. They're going to lose, say, 15 or so at the moment, perhaps going north of that. So the Democrats are going to have a majority. I think we just hold on in the Senate. The Senate will stay Republican just because of like Ohio is a seat. We ought to retain Ohio. It'll be close, but we should. So the outcome of this is you've got 1 year to get this done, to get domestic stuff done. They're showing no interest in doing that. Of course, now all hands on deck for Iran. And so there's no upside politically to doing this. Even if you meet this laundry list of goals, none of them are going to change anybody's opinion and help you. But if you don't meet the list of goals, it could hurt you because you haven't been America First, and then maybe you don't accomplish something. So in terms of politics, I imagine the pollsters are tearing their hair out in the White House. Now, that's not a good reason to stop. And the president rightly said, look, I'm in this to serve the country. I don't care what the pollsters say. And there's a time for presidents to say that. And Lincoln famously said once, 1 vote in favor, 19 against, the 1 vote has it because it's my vote. We elect someone to do the job, and then they're allowed within that to do as they see fit. So that's not a reason not to, but the politics, no, they don't help the Republicans here at all. And if this goes south, the Senate could very well be in play, and then that would be a different conversation. We're not there yet. We're not at that point yet, but I keep my eye on that.
But we have seen oil prices, gas prices rise. Presumably there's going to be inflation that's going to hit American workers. The Democrats are leaping on this, calling Republicans neocons, forever wars, and so on. All I can see at the moment is downsides politically for the president. Will people forget about this by November? What's your how do you see this playing out?
No, because affordability, and Stephen, you're onto this. Affordability was already the issue that Mamdani and some on the left in the Democratic Party were breaking through. And in essence, what affordability seems to be is your paycheck keeping up with inflation in a medium term way. And of course, Biden, when he destroyed everything, when he spent money like a drunken sailor, and we had 9% inflation, and the Fed totally took their eye off the ball. You want to pick on Jerome Powell? I mean, he ruined 40 years of fiscal discipline at the Fed. That's the point. They were spending money like a drunken sailor, and he didn't do anything. The problem is that affordability is seen in 4 or 5 year snapshots. What you've just said, oil prices are going to go through the roof in the short run. There's going to be a shock up. Inflation's already really sticky. The tariffs haven't led to any major problem, but it hasn't gone back to 2%. It's settling it nearer to 3%. And then you add in now the gas and oil prices going up. And no, there isn't enough time for people to forget that. And so I think that this isn't, and people do vote on the economy overwhelmingly. The issues people vote on have to do with employment and inflation, are the two things people vote on. So no, this is all downside. And so we've revised in my firm and on the Substack, we've revised our firms to say it'll be north of 15 seats now in the House, that you see some erosion already, and that will continue. And the Senate could be in play. It certainly could. And this is the year we should hold the Senate. It's 53-47 for the Republicans. We see 2 seats going already. So now you're into dangerous territory, and that's before the price spike.
So what are Republican strategists saying about this? Are there lots of warning signs? The opinion polls aren't looking good for President Trump and the GOP more generally. There was that election in Texas recently that was a complete disaster. We saw the primaries in Texas more recently. Are there people raising these concerns? Are Republican strategists saying, hold on, we need to focus on the economy, we need to focus on domestic issues, this foreign policy stuff is going to lose us seats?
I think they were. I don't think they are anymore. I think the problem is that decision has already been made. They've crossed the Rubicon on that already. And I think that's the problem. You're onto that. There was a battle before, several months ago and into these weeks, where a group of people, pollsters and others, said, we should be focused on the SAVE Act. We should be all in about the big, beautiful bill and the positive things about getting it done. We should do deregulation of gas. We should talk about fracking, drill, baby, drill, all these things that are popular with the base. And we ought to be concerned with that. And we can limit the damage in the House and easily hold the Senate. That's what you were elected to do. America first, in other words. And then the military guy said, we have this unique opportunity to take out the senior leadership. And there were concerns internally about which route to take. And they have clearly chosen now to take the route of the war. And the problem is you can't go back easily and remake that decision. So I think that's been made. And so they've baked that into the cake now. And so the problem is, again, I would declare victory and get out. We've defanged the Iranians is the way out of this. We've whacked Khomeini. We've whacked the 50 or so people running the country. I already set the program back in Fordow. We've now whacked out the missiles. They're no threat to anybody. We'll keep our eye on them, and we'll mow the lawn if we have to. If we have to do it again, we'll go back and do it again. But we're going to move on to the domestic agenda. That would take tremendous fortitude, but that would be politically the way forward. That would be the advice I would give the president today if I were asked.